Hello and welcome to Introductory Psychology. I'm Christina Scott and I will be your professor virtually for the next 8 weeks. So what I'm going to do each week is give you an overview of the chapter. So if you open up, let's say like Psychology is Science Chapter 1, you'll see that I've got my notes listed out kind of, in Roman numerals. So I'll give you the lecture. If you want to follow along, that's great. If you want to read the book and then go back to the lecture and just kind of look for some of those details, do what's going to make sense for you with your life, your time, and the way you learn. But my goal is to give you something a little bit more engaging, I hope, to enjoy with the material. So we're going to talk about psychology. So oftentimes people think of only one type of psychologist. They think of clinical psychologists. So I'm having problems. I call through my insurance. I'm going to sit down and talk with someone, about what I'm going through. Maybe they'll give me some reassurance, give me some strategies for coping and success with my stress. But there are many more types of researchers and psychologists out there. So I personally am a social psychologist. So I study how our behavior changes if we think someone else is watching us. So I always say, if you had a muffin and no one's around, you just inhale that muffin. I mean, there'd be crumbs everywhere. No one would care. But the moment I know that someone's watching me eat the muffin, I'm probably a little bit more careful of, what size bite I take. Am I, wiping my mouth with a napkin? So my field of psychology, I teach primarily, and then I also do research. So my research is looking into relationships, especially sexual relationships, of how we decide who our partners are. Do we experience regret after we make these decisions? And I also look at kind of the relationships that single parents have and how they cope. So those are the two areas that I've gone into. So I want you to know there are two different types of research. I wrote down kind of basic research and applied research. So basic research, as I put, is supposed to basically help us understand something and apply it in real life. So basic research would be right now, how do we understand how iPads and different devices and social media are affecting kids? So my children are fairly young. They're in elementary school. And as they're growing up, they've never known life without a touch device. And they can't understand how I survived before the days of iPad. So that would be basic research. So think of it like basic research is try to understand something versus applied research is usually trying to solve a problem. So if we know now that kids, especially young girls, are feeling more body shame, they're feeling lower self-esteem because of social media, and we want to see how we can stop that and prevent that, that's going to be the applied research. So that's kind of a nice distinction for you to hang on to as you're reading in your textbook. The other thing I'd want you to know about research is that we can have experimental research and we can have non-experimental research. So non-experimental research, I'm just kind of observing behaviors. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I'm watching an NFL game and I notice that the team that wears the lighter colored jerseys seems to have less penalties than the team that's wearing the darker colored jerseys. I wonder whether that's something to consider. So I watch the next 20, Super Bowls and I just start kind of categorizing. Do teams in lighter jerseys get fewer penalties? Okay, then in darker jerseys, that's not experimental. Think of it that it's like hands off. I'm just observing. Versus if I'm looking at experimental research, now I'm going to go in and I'm going to manipulate. I'm going to change something and see how it affects the outcome. So in this case, I talked to the NFL organizers. For some reason, they let me talk to them. And I said, you know what? Halfway through the Super Bowl, I want you to change jerseys. So if you are with this particular team, instead of wearing your home jersey, switch to your away jersey. This team, you're going to switch jerseys. So each team has a light and dark jersey. Halftime, switch to the opposite one and see whether we still see that. That would be experimental research. Also, if you think back to the COVID-19 vaccines, that was experimental research. Some people received the COVID vaccine, some people did not. So even all the people who said, yes, please, I want to try it, half of them were in the experimental group. Half of them got the actual vaccine. Half of them got a placebo, which is sugar water. And we wanted to see, okay, if you're the people who are vaccinated, are you fighting off COVID-19 better? Are you staying healthier? If you do contract it, is it a shorter illness? So that's a type of experimental research. All right, so I'm going to go over the fields of psychology for you. As you can see, I've listed 7 of them. I mentioned social psychology and I mentioned clinical psychology. So clinical, helping you solve your problems, okay, and kind of work through the different stressors in your life. Social, we talked about, is trying to see how you change your behavior. Things like prejudice, love and attraction, friendships, self-identity, all those would go under social psychology. Developmental psychology looks at how we change from birth all the way up to death, specifically how we change physically, how we change cognitively, meaning the way we think and the way we process information in our language, and also how we change socially, how we interact with people differently. Cognitive and cognitive neuroscience. Cognitive is, again, kind of like I just mentioned a little bit with developmental. Cognitive is basically language acquisition, our intelligence, how we process information. Have you ever noticed, like, if there's been a bad breakup, those two people or a fight, both people were right there. They saw the exact same thing, but 24 hours later, they remember it very differently. That would be something in cognitive psychology. Cognitive neuroscience is like the crossover between psychology and medicine. And that specifically looks at the different chemicals in our brain, the different neurotransmitters, how if, again, back to the NFL, I get hit, in the head with a hard tackle, how is that brain damage or that repeated damage to my skull, how's it going to affect the way I process information? Okay, so that's cognitive neuroscience. Health psychology is going to look kind of at stress. So have you ever noticed that when you have something really important coming up and you're starting to get a cold, you're like, not now, I'm not getting a cold. And you manage to kind of hold on for a while. But the moment, like, whatever that event is past, you're like, oh, and you kind of drop your guard and bam, you're sick. For me, teaching, I know every spring break and every Thanksgiving break, I'm going to be sick. It's like my body holds on until that moment. So health psychology looks at how our mental capacity affects our overall health and vice versa. Industrial organizational psychology. If you've noticed, cars, the dashboards have changed quite a bit. I'm thinking of like if Tesla has their big touch screen, the different gadgets and gears. So industrial organizational psychology often looks more at like user interface. So you better believe when the iPad came out, they had industrial organizational psychologists figuring out how we would naturally tap, where we would look. So that's more the industrial part. Organizational is more of kind of helping businesses function better. So how do you get large groups of people to kind of work for the greater good of one particular company? So that's industrial, or what we call IO psychology. And then lastly, I put sports psychology. It's a growing field of helping athletes kind of get over whatever mental blocks might be keeping them from performing their best in their sport. So that's kind of a growing area as well. As you'll notice in my notes, I gave you a little bit of an overview of the founding parents of psychology. The Greeks were the first ones who said, you know what, let's kind of take a moment here. Let's think about ourselves. Why am I doing that? Why am I in a bad mood? Why does this person really set me off? So that's called introspection. Wilhelm Wundt, he was one of the first people to stop and say, let's look at the mind. And he said, the mind really contains all this information of how we process emotions, sensations, how we can both look at a painting and you might say, I love that painting. I'm like, oh, I hate that painting. He wanted to kind of understand that. William James really looked at behavior. And what he said is, do we learn from our experiences? So if I've had this experience in this setting, can I use that information to make my life better if a similar event happens, but in a different time, in a different way? Can I transfer my learning? B.F. Skinner was very well known because he was 100% in the opinion that all of our behavior was based on like rewards and punishments. Almost like, think of like training a dog, unfortunately. Like, I can train a dog to sit, I can train a dog to heel, and fetch. And it's very much like I reward the behavior I want and I punish the behavior I don't. And there's not really any higher cognitive functioning. It's just do this for the reward, do this, and you're going to get a punishment. So I learned I only want the rewards. B.F. Skinner felt that that's how we as adults learned. Most of us don't believe B.F. Skinner got that completely right. There is a certain element of how we behave is based on learning, but I can't say that everything we do is based on learning. Some of it, we can observe someone else, learn and be like, oh, that person's speeding. I'm going to slow down. Sometimes we can just listen to conversations. Sometimes we just process information and decide, no, I don't want that to happen. I'm not going to do that. So there's a lot more higher order thinking than I think Skinner gave us credit for. And the one that most people know is Sigmund Freud. We'll talk more about Freud when we get to the chapter on personality. But Freud took the view kind of dead opposite of Skinner. So Skinner's like, oh, it's all learned. And Freud said, no, no, no. So much of who we are is hidden from our conscious awareness. So we're behaving based on all these needs and desires that we can't even be fully aware of. And most of them he felt were sexual desires. So his belief was everything we did were because of our inner need for different aspects. So our need for sex, our need for acknowledgement and power, our need for association with others, but that we weren't aware of it. So go back to the Greeks that I did at the beginning who were like, it's all about introspection. Freud's like, no, you have no introspection. Without me, without a trained psychoanalyst, you'll never understand yourself. More on him later. So there you go. That's a preview of coming attractions. So more modern theories, probably the one you'll see the most now is what we call the cognitive behavioral approach. So that one says, you know what? Let's say I am having trouble at work. I'm just under a lot of stress. The first thing that will be looked at is how am I thinking about work? Am I thinking about work as a dangerous place? Am I thinking about work as a place where I don't have very good self-esteem? I'm feeling threatened. So what can I do to change the way I think? And then how can my behaviors reflect that? So instead of coming into work like, oh, things are going to go wrong, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to change my thinking. I'm going to think of work as a neutral place, a place where I can show others my capabilities. And then that, because I've changed my thinking, I can now try some new behaviors. And hopefully this will improve my experience at work. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. The sociocultural perspective says that we really need to look at people's behaviors in the context of who they are and how they see themselves in the world. So looking at race and ethnicity, looking at gender, looking at culture, and trying to say, when we evaluate behaviors, let's not just use this particular kind of metric of like, everybody should be like this. Well, what is it in their culture? How is it evaluated? Even if we think about psychology, that most of our research that we're doing in the US, does it necessarily apply to Europe? Does it necessarily apply to Asia? Does it necessarily apply to the Middle East or Africa or South America? Like, as we look, how can we say, is this generalizable? Can we expand our knowledge? So I went over a little bit of research and then I realized now I'm on to the research section. So for those of you going, wait, you covered some of that in the beginning, but now we're on the research section. What can I say? I was enthusiastic. So you'll see that it says Roman numeral 2 on psychology research. We take what we call the empirical approach. That means that we have a research question and we want to find an answer. That's basically all it is. Okay, we have a question, we want to find an answer. So we have theories. They're kind of the big overarching beliefs. And then we're going to have a hypothesis. That's one specific research question that we want to test. So please note for B and C, it says qualitative and quantitative research. They're slightly different. They both have a research question, but qualitative does it without numbers. Qualitative is going to be things like interviews, focus groups, case studies. So I'm going to sit and I'm going to say, all right, I want to understand what is the test anxiety that students experience. So if I'm doing qualitative, I'm not going to say, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed out are you? I'm going to instead say, well, what are some of the things that stress you out? Why do you think these cause you concern? What are your greatest fears when it comes to taking a test? Do you see how those are kind of open-ended questions? They allow for you to kind of talk and tell a story and explain. So with qualitative research, we don't use hardcore statistics. We're kind of summarizing the data. So we'd say, wow, the majority of people seem to have this theme of feeling like tests were assessing their intelligence and that there was a fear that they wouldn't perform well. So that's kind of the goal of qualitative research. We also do observations. So think of if I'm watching kids on the playground, I'm trying to see some kids are naturally more aggressive. Some kids are naturally shy and they're just kind of sitting off to the side. That would be a type, again, of qualitative research. Quantitative research is with statistics. We're now talking numbers. And this gives most people just anxiety thinking about the numbers. If you do get a chance to take the research methods course, that will actually break that down for you into more bite-sized chunks. It's not as intimidating as it seems, but we talk about independent and dependent variables. Again, please be aware, this is 14 minutes. I'll always try to keep these to like 20 so that you can watch them and then go off and do something else with your day. So I'm going through this very quickly. My recommendation is read the book, watch the video, then necessarily watch the video again or read the book again, depending on which medium works for you. But back to independent, dependent variables. Let's say I want to see if having a healthy breakfast gives people more confidence when they go to work. Okay, so whatever it is I'm measuring, whatever outcome I'm hoping for is the dependent variable. So in this case, it's confidence going to work. What is it I hope will have an effect on it? The independent variable would be breakfast. So the way I remember this is I say the dependent variable always depends on the independent variable. So my confidence at work will always depend on whether I had breakfast. Okay. So you're going, oh, I think I got it. And then it was gone. That's okay. Again, this is introductory psychology. It goes very quickly because every chapter is different from the next. So think of this like a Vegas buffet. You're just trying to get a little bit of a taste of everything to see what you like. Okay. Also, I will have office hours if anyone wants to sit down with me on Zoom and say, could you go over that again? I feel like I could understand it with a couple more examples. I'll be happy to do so. So let's do this. I believe that students who interact with the professor feel less stress than those who don't interact with the professor. Okay. So what am I hoping will be the outcome? Stress, less of it. Okay. Less stress would be my dependent variable. Whether or not you interact with the professor would be the independent variable. If you got that right, you're going in the right direction. All right, we talked a little bit about experimental research, that we would manipulate something, we would change something. So let's say I want to find out whether green M&Ms actually make you feel more, they make you feel sexier, they make you feel more ready to go out and take over the world. So I would say, all right, some people are going to get green M&Ms, some people are going to get red M&Ms. Okay. And I'm going to, in this case, you don't know what color your M&Ms you're going to get. I just give you a cup, you take your M&Ms and off you go. If you didn't know which M&Ms you were taking, and I'm the researcher who decides which color you get, experimental. If it's non-experimental, you got to pick what color M&Ms you want to eat. Okay. I do want you to know that in experimental research, in fact, all research, there is what they call the IRB. It's the Institutional Review Board. Think of it like, it's like the checks and balances to make sure that we don't do horrible things to people. We have an IRB that is made up of faculty members so every institution has one. Okay, so Rio Hondo has their own. It's people will read the research that you say you're going to be doing and say, will it harm anyone? Are there any major risks we need to consider? Okay, if everything looks pretty good, then go ahead, you can conduct your research. What I do want you to put a star next to, just because it's life knowledge, is that before you participate in research, you have to give informed consent. You have to give informed consent before surgery, before having a tooth taken out, before even having stitches. They have to say, here's all the risks and here's all the things that could go wrong. Do you accept them? And then you sign your name. I encourage all of you never to sign your name on a consent form unless you consent and you know what the risks are. Like, go ahead. Tick off whoever is behind the desk with the clipboard and say, no, I don't understand this. I'm not signing it until you explain it to me. You have that right. And I think especially in the medical profession, I am known for like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not consenting yet. I don't understand. They look at me like, just sign it. I'm like, no, it said informed consent. When I'm informed, I'll consent. So just remember that. Debriefing is that if there's anything they didn't tell you in the beginning, which most of it they have to, at the end of a study, they have to say, oh, by the way, here, let's clear up any deception. So again, remember back to the COVID-19 vaccines. If I had been in the group that didn't get the vaccine, at the end of the trial, they had to say, hey, you didn't get the actual vaccine, but would you like to go get, a vaccination now? We're going to put you at the front of the line for that. Oh, thank you for telling me. Yes, I would like to get my vaccine. Or no, I wouldn't. But that would be the debriefing. So at the end of the study, they have to clear up anything that wasn't out there up front and honest. So let's see, we did most of those. I think you got that. Populations and samples. I think most of that you can look over generally in the book, but the idea is that a population is the big group and we try to estimate populations by taking a sample. Costco, best example I've got. If you notice that you go to Costco and they have samples, like you get to try a little bite of whatever that is that they're selling. And you're supposed to try to decide from the sample, What do I think of that? Do I want to go buy the large, 36 serving portion of pot roast? And you decide, yes, I do, from that one little sample. I'm sure some of you have bought something at Costco from the sample and then thought, oh, I don't like that as much as I thought I did. Same thing happens to us. What we hope is that if we're going to estimate a population, so if I'm going to estimate everyone at Rio Hondo and how they feel about something, I don't want to ask just 2 students. That's not enough. I want to probably get like at least 10% of that population to be in my sample. Okay, so the bigger my sample, okay, the more I can truly understand the population. So at Costco, if I have 6 or 7 samples, I probably will know better whether I like that pot roast and whether it's worth $26.99. There you have it. So I'm sorry, we're at 20 minutes right now. I'm just going to explain your first psychology in action. What I'm going to ask you to do is to go and ask some family and friends like 2 open-ended questions. So what I want you to do is just say, hey, what has been like the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you? Or what makes you the happiest in life? You can make it a positive question. And what I'd like you to do is then see if you could get again, ask 2 people what they've got and see if you see any similarities. The idea behind this would be that think about, are you seeing categories? So if you ask somebody and again, if you could ask more people, all the better. So if you ask, let's say 5 people, what is your happiest memory? Do you notice that it tends to be about relationships? Do you notice it tends to be about some sort of success at work? Like, what are the commonalities in people's answers that you're seeing? So I'll do another video talking with you more about these psychology in action assignments and how you'll post those up to get additional points. But I welcome you to the course. We're at 21 minutes. I will try to keep it under in the future, but welcome to all of you, and I hope you enjoy the course. Bye.